أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وما لكم لا تقاتلون في سبيل الله والمستضعفين من الرجال والنساء والولدان الذين يقولون ربنا أخرجنا من هذه القرية ظالمين أهلها واجعل لنا من لدنك وليا واجعل لنا من لدنك نصيرا. This ayat from chapter 4, verse 75 of the Quran translates as, "And how can you refuse to fight in the cause of Allah and of those utterly helpless, men, women, and children who are crying, Ya Rab, our sustainer, lead us forth to freedom out of this land whose people are oppressors, and raise for us out of thy grace a protector, and raise for us out of thy grace one who will bring us help and succor." And we can see the failure of the world to rise to protect desperate victims, whether it is in Palestine, in Gaza, or the West Bank, or absolutely the horrific crimes that is being perpetuated in Sudan today. Perhaps the worst one has ever seen. It has engulfed in Sudan one of Africa's bloodiest conflicts, and this started in April 2023, much to the world, and many of the African countries have opted to remain unmoved and not helping the Mustadafin in that particular part of the world. And this, just to give you a brief background, that allowed this painful suffering of millions to endure while the battle is between what they call the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, and is led by somebody called Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo. Hemeti is known, and he has turned this country into a hellhole of death and destruction. And when this war broke out, it was between the Sudanese armed forces, and this was led by a transitional military council led by Abdul Fattah al-Burhan. And the estimation that of the casualties is a minimum of between 150,000 to 250,000 that have been killed in the Sudan. And many of these crimes committed by both sides have been documented by many human rights organizations. At least 14 to 15 million Sudanese have, out of a population of 51 million, have been displaced. And what is the reason for this? There is gold in the mines of the Sudan, and both sides want that gold. And who is behind the destruction and support of the RSF is none other than the Zionist entity known as Israel and the Gulf Sheikhdoms. And remember, Sudan actually normalized relations with Israel, thinking it may protect him or protect the Sudanese from destruction, but it failed. And we shouldn't be surprised. And this is not because I am biased against the Zionist state. It is reported in Haaretz, the newspaper from Israel. And it talks about that Israel was exploiting Sudan's war to justify its military expansion in the Red Sea under the banner of protecting the global shipping lanes from the Houthi threats. So one needs to take the geopolitical aspect into consideration here. It is also interfering in Ethiopia and in Eritrea, and it's important to look at the map where Sudan is placed. Remember, it was the biggest country in Africa. We must also remember that Sudan is such fertile territory, it could support not only Africa but the rest of the world with food and meat and so on. So here we find this destabilization of this area that is taking place because they want its oil and they want its gold. And they broke up Sudan into South Sudan and North Sudan, thinking that South Sudan is Christian. When it had a population of about 15%, they said, no, it's a Christian area, and they broke it up. Now, the area of the Red Sea, it goes up to the Suez Canal, and it goes right down to Bab el Mandab. And that strait, it is the line where a lot of 30% to 40% of the oil goes through that particular strait. And that is the area where the Ansarullah, they call them the Houthis, they started disrupting the shipping lanes in order to defend and help protect the Hamas fighters in Gaza. So Israel has maneuvered and they destabilized Sudan in order to disrupt the support of Hamas by Sudan. But my purpose and of this talk is really to talk about the Gaza Tribunal. And all of this is intertwined. I returned last week from Istanbul, and the Gaza Tribunal, like all other conferences, has its advantages, but it is in the sidelines of a conference that you really learn. Now, what is the Gaza Tribunal? Just to bring you up to speed on it. It's a court case that is conducted by civil society, ordinary people, because governments fail to charge those who are perpetrating crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide. So they form this tribunal. About 20 years ago, 2011, they had the Russell Tribunal that was based in Cape Town to discuss whether Israel is an apartheid state. And Bertrand Russell was a philosopher, a British man, who said that if governments are not able to conduct an investigation and prosecute those who are charged for war crimes, then the civil society must take up the cudgels. And he did that because America conducted horrendous war crimes. We see or we remember the napalm bombing of 3 million Vietnamese that were killed in Vietnam, innocent civilians, and they got away with it. Nobody was prosecuted. So he formed this. And the Gaza Tribunal here had about 6 jurors. They were witnesses. They talked about the crimes that are perpetuating against the people in Gaza. And it was conducted and directed by Richard Falk. Richard Falk was a United Nations rapporteur, American, Jewish, and he conducted this hearings that was in Sarajevo. Why Sarajevo is important? Because of the crimes that the Muslims were killed in Bosnia, and then in London, and the final hearings were held in Istanbul. And this is also because of the failure of the ICJ case. I mean, South Africa really was very brave to conduct and charge the Zionist regime for war crimes and genocide. But it is taking so long, and the genocide continues. The ICC case, and only now Turkey has issued a warrant of arrest for 37 Zionists. And of course, South Africa is leading on that as well. There were others at the conference, like the Hind Rajah Foundation. The Hind Rajah Foundation throughout the world is following and trying to prosecute Zionist soldiers who are conducting these war crimes in Gaza. And they are doing it all over the world. And South African lawyers have also joined into it. Of course, we talk about those who were attending the conference, include those anti-Zionists who were on the flotilla. But what I learned about the Gaza inquiry, the tribunal, is that whilst it is important for us to engage in activism, it is important to transform this activism, our protests, our boycotts, very critical to create awareness, into an organization. And this is where I want to bring in Mamdani. Zohran Mamdani shook a lot of the world, particularly the Western world and the Zionists. And when he stood for elections, he had about a year and a half ago just 1% of the vote. Now, I'm mentioning him because of the lessons we can learn from Mamdani's campaign. And he worked extremely hard. And he went to the taxi ranks. Mamdani shows how effective, actually exposed how ineffective our actions are, and one must think about it. So he focused and he was unapologetic about the fact that he's a Muslim. He had eventually got 100,000 volunteers, some of them on an average age of about 25 years. When they saw that there was a support system building for Mamdani, those capitalists in power started funding a campaign, and they collected about $30 million to fight Mamdani. Mamdani eventually collected only $1.2 million. So the ratio was 30 to 1. Now remember, New York, he was fighting as a mayor to become mayor of New York, which is the capital of capitalism. And he sought to organize the poor around that. 80% of New Yorkers are poor. So he went to the taxi ranks, he went to the churches, he went to synagogues, to mosques, into the townships as we will know it here. And then he started a social media campaign. Remember, I'm mentioning this so that we can heed some of the lessons. And he argued on social justice. He said that the poor people need to live and they must freeze rental. There must be free transportation because it's becoming impossible for those of the working class to move around from home to job. And they lived in the peripheries because it was too expensive to live in the cities. So transport was important. And it is the same thing in our country as well. He said he will fund this by taxing the rich, 2% more of the rich class. And I think New York is probably the second highest in terms of billionaires throughout the world. And he showed how is it possible to have groceries at cost and, of course, child care. So he developed a leverage, and we need to think about how the Zionists have infiltrated and penetrated our countries. We know about Guptas, how they actually uh, controlled certain important areas of government and policy development. And we need to understand how the Zionists are doing it in South Africa. They've done it in America. And this is what Mamdani is afterwards. Of course, we in our social media, we talk about Mamdani is we must be careful of him. We cannot support him because he's a Shia. 5 other Shias have won. In fact, he's not only Shia, he is Khoja. And then his mother is Hindu, his father is a communist. Now we're focusing on those things. I'm asking us to focus on the lessons of how he actually got a majority of the people to become to become the next mayor of New York. There are difficulties that he's going to face. Why? Because it is a system that he's against. And as I mentioned earlier, $30 million in order to challenge him. But it is a system, and one can see there's somebody called Jessica Tisch. He did make a statement against the New York Police Department where he accused them of racism. And then he apologized and went to him. And the leader is Jessica Tisch. And we need to do our research on our own government people in this country. Jessica Tisch comes from a billionaire class, put in head as the New York Police Department, Zionist, Jewish, supporting Israel, and whether he keeps her on or not is up for debate. Now, this is where the system starts putting pressure on Mamdani, that you need to retract from that. Already, some of the pension funds, he says, we cannot invest in Israel anymore. So he's getting a feedback on that, and this is the system that we are going to face. If we want to challenge the system, we need to plan and how we're going to do it. So, one of the primary lessons I think we need to see what Mamdani did and how do we implement it here is the difference between how he used activism and transformed it into an organization. You see, activism, as I mentioned earlier, is good. We protest, we boycott, but it creates awareness, uh, but it is short term. It lasts for a very short time. And I'm going to give you an example. Yesterday, you may have seen on the news, a plane came from a base in Israel with 160 Palestinians on board, men, women, and children. And they kept them on that plane. And this is the second plane because they said they had no visas to enter. Now, in our campaign, many years ago, we argued that Israelis are allowed to come to South Africa without a visa. How is it that Palestinians whom we should be allied with have to have a visa? We won that case. So they come in, they're given a month's visa, and they're allowed to enter. So, yeah, these people are stuck in an aeroplane. They refused to let them disembark yesterday. And some people got wind of it. This is the second plane that came in, and the Zionists are clever. The base that they left this plane was Ramon base. They chartered a flight, went to Nairobi, and then landed in OR Tambo. This chartered flight is Israeli linked, and they didn't stamp their passports. So the airport authorities were correct in not letting them in because there is no exit point. However, this is the brilliance of the Zionists and the weakness of our activism. So, of course, we went, or many of the civil society groups went to the airport, they fought the case. Whether it is DERCO, there was an argument of Home Affairs, and this is where we need to do our homework. Who runs Home Affairs? The DA. Who funds the DA? The Zionist. So this is the challenge that we in South Africa face. So we react to a situation, whereas the Zionists are very, very proactive. They start controlling some of these systems. They build power. And this is something we need to do. We react to events because we get emotional about it. They run campaigns, which is long term, it is systematic, and they develop collective power. So they have that leverage on governments. And of course, our activism is short term. Next week we'll find another problem. We'll react. We'll go protest and demand and happy with our action if we win the case or feel bad about it. But we need to think about a long-term transformation of policies. This is the problem with Zionism. It has developed into a global project. I talked about Mamdani in New York. They control the levers of power. I talked about Sudan, how they are geopolitically controlling certain areas, Ethiopia, Yemen, Eritrea. They wield influence over international politics, over the media. You should have listened to the questions that were asked to one of the people who tried to free the Palestinians. And by the way, he's a pastor. Nigel, he was a pastor. He was in the plane and refused to leave that plane until 60 of the other Palestinians were boarded. Where are our ulama? They should have been there. I just think aloud. And of course, they control the economic systems. So, in conclusion, many of the world's problems today that shape global politics is based by and run by the Zionists. And this is something we need to adhere to. So I want to conclude that will Mamdani succeed? It is unlikely. He is fighting against a system like the Hamas in Gaza is fighting against a system. 2 years has shocked the world, but they continue to resist occupation, they continue to resist the system. And this is something that we need to absorb. Like Mamdani, will he succeed? No. Let us not look at the sectarian argument, but just look at the organization in which he has developed and we can replicate in South Africa. He speaks Spanish. So he spoke to the people in Spanish. How many of us speak the local language? How do we go into the townships? How much more effective it will be if we speak in their language, if we understand what they say, if we live amongst them so that we can actually absorb and react to the problems that they face. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah 48, it is He, Allah, who has sent His messenger with guidance and true faith with Iman, so that He may help it prevail all over other deen. And deen is not mentioned as a religion, it's translated as religion. But deen means all over all our other people's way of life, all other systems. And this is where we as an ummah, we need social justice. We proclaim social justice. We need to use our Islam to say, listen, we want to elevate all the people in South Africa, black and white, and we have the truth with us, so we don't need to fear. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ends it that says, even if the mushriks consider it difficult. So we need to challenge and be confident that this system that we are proclaiming is something that will be victorious in the end. Wa akhir dawana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
الحمد لله، الحمد لله الأكرم الذي خلق الإنسان وكرمه وعلمه من البيان ما لم يعلم. فسبحان الذي لا يحصى امتنانه باللسان ولا بالقلم. ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، ونشهد أن سيدنا ومولانا محمد عبده ورسوله الذي أوتي جوامع الكلم وكرائم الحكم ومكارم الشيم، صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وأصحابه نجوم الطريق الأمم. أما بعد، فإن علم الشرائع والأحكام هو أعظم فرائض الإسلام، ومن ثم أمير به وحض عليه تعليما وتعلما. فقد قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: بلغوا عني ولو آية. وقال عليه الصلاة والسلام: من سلك طريقا يلتمس فيه علما سهل الله له به طريقا إلى الجنة. وقال عليه الصلاة والسلام: من يرد الله به خيرا يفقهه في الدين. وقال عليه الصلاة والسلام: إن العلماء ورثه الأنبياء، وإن الأنبياء لم يورثوا دينارا ولا درهما، وإنما ورثوا العلم، فمن أخذه أخذ بحظ وافر. وقال عليه الصلاة والسلام: طلب العلم فريضة على كل مسلم. وقال عليه الصلاة والسلام: من سئل عن علم علمه ثم كتمه أحجم يوم القيامة بلجام من نار. وقال عليه الصلاة والسلام: من تعلم علما مما يبتغى به وجه الله لا يتعلمه إلا ليصيب به عرضا من الدنيا لم يجد عرف الجنة يوم القيامة، يعني ريحها. وقال عليه الصلاة والسلام: تعلموا الفرائض والقرآن وعلموا الناس فإني مقبوض. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. أمن هو قانت آناء الليل ساجدا وقائما يحذر الآخرة ويرجو رحمة ربه. قل هل يستوي الذين يعلمون والذين لا يعلمون؟ إنما يتذكر أولو الألباب. الحمد لله، الحمد لله يستعينه واستغفره، ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له، ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله بالحق بشيرا ونذيرا بين يدي الساعة. من يطع الله ورسوله فقد رشد، ومن يعصهما فإنه لا يضر إلا نفسه ولا يضر الله شيئا. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي، يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك، وصل على المؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات، وبارك على محمد وأزواجه وذريته. قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: أرحم أمتي أمتي أبو بكر، وأشدهم في أمر الله عمر، وأصدقهم حياء عثمان، وأقضاهم علي وفاطمة سيدة نساء أهل الجنة، والحسن والحسين سيدا شباب أهل الجنة، وحمزة أسد الله وأسد رسوله. اللهم اغفر للعباس وولده مغفرة ظاهرة وباطنة لا تغادر ذنبا. الله الله في أصحابي لا تتخذهم غرضا من بعدي، فمن أحبهم فبحبي أحبهم، ومن أبغضهم فببغضي أبغضهم، وخير أمتي قرني ثم الذين يلونهم ثم الذين يلونهم. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. فاذكروني أذكركم واشكروا لي ولا تكفرون.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح. قامت الصلاة قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله.
الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الرحمن الرحيم، مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين، اهدنا الصراط المستقيم، صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تلهكم أموالكم ولا أولادكم عن ذكر الله، ومن يفعل ذلك فأولئك هم الخاسرون. وأنفقوا مما رزقناكم من قبل أن يأتي أحدكم الموت فيقول رب لولا أخرتني إلى أجل قريب فأصدق وأكن من الصالحين، ولن يؤخر الله نفسا إذا جاء أجلها، والله خبير بما تعملون. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الرحمن الرحيم، مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين، اهدنا الصراط المستقيم، صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. أفلا ينظرون إلى الإبل كيف خلقت وإلى السماء كيف رفعت وإلى الجبال كيف نصبت وإلى الأرض كيف سطحت فذكر إنما أنت مذكر لست عليهم بمسيطر إلا من تولى وكفر فيعذبه الله العذاب الأكبر إن إلينا إيابهم ثم إن علينا حسابهم. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. اللهم أنت السلام ومنك السلام تباركت يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. ربنا إننا سمعنا مناديا ينادي للإيمان أن آمنوا بربكم فآمنا. ربنا فاغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا وتوفنا مع الأبرار. ربنا وآتنا ما وعدتنا على رسلك ولا تخزنا يوم القيامة إنك لا تخلف الميعاد. سمعنا وأطعنا غفرانك ربنا وإليك المصير. بفضل سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.